Good morning, everyone. Is this case a mess? That it is. Because this man right here, he created that mess. He committed the crimes against Marcia Soul, a woman that he knew was vulnerable and old, and that he knew had a mental instability because he Baker acted her on October 21st of 2016. And I want you to hold him accountable for the mess that he created and the crimes that he committed. He tried to kill Marcia Soul. He kidnapped her and had her committed to a mental institution where she couldn't reach out to anyone for help. And even if she did, even if she was able to communicate with the public, no one would believe her because he saw to it that everyone thought she was a loony. He saw to it that everyone thought she was insane and couldn't be believed. He went into her house without her permission or consent and remained in her house with the intent to kill her. And he certainly battered her while he was in there. Talk about huge holes in this case. How convenient is it that the defense merely glosses over the following? Mr. Kerpeers conveniently failed to mention that the IP addresses...
Judge, we have no burden.
It's a direct comment and a fair comment on the argument that you made, Mr. Kerpeers.
Conveniently glosses over and does not mention the IP address from which those fraudulent emails derived came from that man's home in Bradenton. There was no mention of that during closing arguments, was there? If Frank Bybee didn't go to Marcia's house on the night of January 11th, why did he tell Detective Gaeta that he was home all night? And I'd like you, during your deliberations, to review his interview. I know it's long and sometimes tedious, but when he was asked where he was on that Wednesday night, Wednesday night, I was home all night. Why didn't he just say, hey, I went out with my friend Troy King, we switched trucks, I was looking for a stalker in Palmetto. If Frank Bybee had permission to use Miss Soul's credit cards, why not say so? Why not be the one, and I think the defense words were, confirm the consent issue? Because when he was asked during the interview, not once but twice, once by Detective Gaeta, and she said to him, did you have permission to use Miss Soul's credit cards? Oh, no, no. Then later on, in that same interview, his attorney that he brought along said the same thing. You didn't use her credit cards or do anything with her credit cards or charge anything on her credit cards? Oh, no, never happened. Miss Soul is not the star witness in this case. Frank Bybee, out of his own mouth, he's the star witness in this case. If Frank Bybee had access to her checkbooks, why didn't he say so? Because when Detective Gaeta said, there shouldn't be any reason for your fingerprints to be on these checks, should there? No, there's no reason. Interestingly enough, his fingerprint was on check 831. In checkbooks, you start with the check on top and the check underneath and the check underneath that. And his fingerprints weren't just on the top of the check, but they were underneath and on the back of check 831. That's not somebody just taking it over to the hospital and putting it in the box. That's someone going through the checkbooks, writing himself 4 checks for a total of $65,000. So this is not a trial against Miss Soul and her personality. It's a trial against the man who created this mess. This is a state's case against Frank Bybee. Now, Mary Ann Dombrow, who was a defense witness in this case, and by the way, if you don't think she has an axe to grind, I'd like to see somebody that does have an axe to grind. She sat up there on the stand and even confronted with the photographs that she took, denied that this woman had any injuries on her face. She sat up there and said, "I don't see any injuries there." It beggars belief that anyone could look at these photographs and say, that woman has no injuries. Those injuries depicted on that face are the same ones that Mr. Wagner took at noon. They might be a little more obvious because, as Sheila Stiles told you, they do have a tendency to bloom a little bit. But they're in the same place, they're exactly the same, and that nightgown that she's wearing is exactly the same. The blood stains all over the front of that nightie, 5 o'clock in the morning, were precisely the same position and the same location as they were at noon. Yet Ms. Dombrow is going to tell you, or did tell you, that those photographs she took, they showed no injuries whatsoever. So that was a defense witness. We're going to talk about some other defense witnesses a little bit later on when we go through the same jury instruction that defense counsel just did about weighing credibility. And I think it's important to look at the credibility of all the witnesses in this case, especially the last few that you heard from yesterday and the day before yesterday. These injuries are consistent with not what defense counsel told you, choking and getting beat up. And it's very, very important in the law to be precise about your language. Miss Soul never said that he beat her up or choked her. She said, and she sat right there and told you that he put his hands over her face and mouth and pressed down as hard as he could, and she continued to struggle. And that when that failed, he picked up a pillow, but that didn't work either. And then he continued with his premeditated design to kill her by shoving pills down her throat, either to kill her or to just knock her out. That's debatable. And then when she was knocked out, he crept into her garage and turned the car on and crept out into the night. Defense counsel thinks it's not evidence that on the 17th, 5 days later, when they finally went to Miss Soul and took photographs of her, what she mentioned was an injury in her groin, that there's still evidence of that. Has it faded over 5 days? Certainly. Should it have been taken on the 12th? Certainly. But it's consistent with what she said. He put his knee in my pelvic area when he was trying to smother me. And there you have it. This photograph was also taken on the 17th, as was this. 5 days later, she still has obvious signs that someone injured her face and mouth. 5 days later, the damage that Frank Bybee did to her on the night of the 11th, actually 6 days later, is still obvious. Is this some vast conspiracy where Miss Soul beats herself up, and the sheriff's office decides they're going to somehow frame Frank Bybee? Is that really what you think happened in this case? Let's talk about weighing the evidence and talk about some particular witnesses. First of all, I think we talked about this in voir dire, that if a story is consistent over time, that shows that it's credible, or at least it's a good indication that it's credible. Was Miss Soul's story about what Frankie Bybee did to her consistent over time? Well, let's think about that. First person that she told in vivid detail was Mary Ann Dombrow, 5:30 or 5:45 in the morning. She said, he tried to smother me, he shoved pills down my throat, and of course there were more details, but for the sake of letting you folks finally stop listening to lawyers talk, I'm just going to run through the details. Tried to smother me, shoved pills down my throat, and turned my car around. Sergeant Allen and Deputy Butler, the guys apparently who aren't on the Bybee train, told you the same thing. Miss Soul told them in detail that Bybee tried to smother her, that he tried to force pills down her throat, and that he turned the car on in her garage. EMT Waltrip, another guy that's not on the Bybee train, said the same thing. The victim alleged that she was attacked. Detective Gaeta was told the same thing by Marcia Soul, repeatedly and in vivid detail. Dr. Lerner was also advised by Marcia Soul that Frankie Bybee tried to kill her, shove pills down her throat, smother her, and turn the car on in her garage. She also told the same story to Dr. Din and said, please, if you don't believe me, call Detective Gaeta. She also told you that same story here in court last week. Every single one, Dombrow, Allen, Butler, Waltrip, Gaeta, Lerner, Din, and the jury that sits here today heard that same exact story, consistent in details over 8 months, 9 months, 10 months of time. And the story that she told all those people is corroborated by the facts and the evidence that came out during this trial. And that's also another reason to show that Marcia Soul is credible. What she told you was corroborated by her bloody nightgown, the photos of injuries, even the ones from Dombrow, that Dombrow said injuries. The photos taken by Jerry Wagner, the crime scene person. The car was running. Even Dombrow had to admit that. When she got there, the car was running. The garage was literally vibrating from the car going inside. The pills were scattered around her chair. There was a bloody towel. There was a blood spots on the chair found by Mr. Wagner. A checkered dishcloth that Bybee threw to Miss Soul and told her to clean up with it. She even told you that it was sopping wet, and she said to him, bring it out, it's not going to work this way. And he did so, and she got the cloth back and wiped up her face and hair. The fingerprint on the checks that we talked about. The car rotisserie in Bybee's house. Another thing that defense attorney conveniently glossed over. Why is that there? You really think that Marcia Soul is buying a car rotisserie for herself? And that somehow it miraculously gets up to Frankie Bybee's house? The PayPal invoices, the car rotisserie, the $400 withdrawals from that NASA Education Fund account, the $65,000 checks mailed to the sheriff's office. And ask yourself, why were they mailed to the sheriff's office on the 29th, the day that Marcia Soul was taken down to Punta Gorda to be Baker acted? Because she would not be able to communicate with the public and let people know that Frankie Bybee stole her money. And yet, by a stroke of fate, those checks were detected by Sergeant Legg. And that's what broke open this whole case. Frankie Bybee didn't expect anyone to intercept those checks at the sheriff's office. He thought he'd come back from vacation, grab those checks, Marcia Soul's in the nut house, and he could cash them and live happily ever after. Ask yourselves why Tanya Thomas would tell you that Bybee is working on the victim's computer on December 9th when Bybee and Tanya pick her up from Consulate Healthcare. Why is he in there? What business does he have to be in there? What's he doing on Miss Soul's computer? Ask yourself, why does Bybee tell Tanya to gather up all the victim's checkbooks, her will, and other paperwork, and put everything in a box, and then he puts that box in the back of Miss Soul's car, and he drives off with that stuff in the car, leaving Tanya Thomas back there at Miss Soul's house to take care of her? Where does he go with all those things that belong to Miss Soul in that box in the trunk of the car that he's driving away? Ask yourself, why does Bybee tell Tanya Thomas that he is Miss Soul's power of attorney? Why would he do that? After she questions him about why he's taking all that financial paperwork and putting it in the trunk of the car. Ask yourselves, why, when Marcia starts questioning Tanya and Bybee about where her credit cards are, when she realizes her credit cards are missing, why does Bybee tell Tanya Thomas to take the expired credit card, put it in an envelope, and give it to Marcia in order to have her shut up? Why? That's consciousness of guilt, ladies and gentlemen. Those are crimes. Ask yourselves, why do we have videos of Bybee withdrawing money from Marcia's account at ATMs all over Sarasota and in Bradenton, right near his home? On December 10th, she's not home. Marcia is back in a facility at Heartland Healthcare, and she's there on the 11th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, and every one of those days, with exception of the 18th, Bybee is withdrawing money from her ATM, from ATMs using her credit card. He even has the effrontery on 2 of those days to wear his uniform as a sworn law enforcement officer when he's committing the crimes. And if he had consent, and why in God's name in that interview didn't he say, oh yeah, she gave me her credit card and told me that I could withdraw $400 every single time? That's not her MO. That's his MO. He denied using her credit card not once but twice. I'm sorry, he denied having her consent to use credit cards not once but twice. If he really did have the consent, why not shout it from the rooftops? Why not tell Gata and Bird and everybody else in that interview room that I did have her consent? Ask yourselves why Troy King. Is it just a coincidence? Why call Troy King on January 11th and say, hey buddy, I want to use your truck? Why did Bybee tell Troy King that he was looking for a stalker in Palmetto? Why did Bybee tell Detective Gata, I never left home that night. I was home all night? Ask yourselves why Mike Day, who apparently is not on the Bybee train either, calls Bybee and tells him that he and Deputy Collison Baker acted Marcia on the 11/29. More important, ask yourself why Bybee responded to Mike Day, "I know. I'm dealing with her." Yeah, he dealt with her all right. January 11th. Ask yourselves why Carson Plank's name comes up in this trial over and over again. Why does Carson Plank call Bybee on the way to Marcia's house on the morning of January 12th, when they know that Marcia has called and reported that Bybee tried to kill her? Why would you call a person accused of a crime and let him know what's going on with the victim? Why does Carson Plank take a photograph of blood on the coffee table and withhold that information and keep silent about it? Why does she withhold that information from her supervisors? Why is he talking to Carson Plank just before he switched trucks with Troy King? And why does Carson Plank call or text him at least twice after she left the crime scene on the morning of January 12th? And why does Bybee cultivate and groom Marcia Soul's friend Philomena Pereira and her so-called friend Marianne Dombro, and insert himself into their lives so quickly and so rapidly that they actually take his side? Now, Philomena apparently saw the light, but Marianne to this very day will tell you that she saw no injuries. Why did he do that? So they could corroborate that she's crazy, that she's delusional, that she's mean, and that she's cranky, and that no one would believe her story. He did that, as Mr. Jackman said, to discredit her. And it worked for a while, until the professionals came on board. The professionals like Detective Gaeta, the professionals like Sergeant Riley, who found those checks, the professionals that investigated this case thoroughly and turned over all the evidence in this case that they found. And it's a mountain of evidence. It's overwhelming evidence beyond the reasonable doubt. Ask yourselves why, when Bybee finds out that Philomena Pereira is going to be interviewed by Internal Affairs on January 5th, he calls her and tells her to delete all the emails, text messages between them. Why? Why did Bybee secretly audio tape his conversation with Sergeant Legg? And why did Bybee insist over and over again, and you can listen to that audio if you wish, and I urge you to do so. Why did Bybee insist that Sergeant Legg read that fake email that he sent from his IP address to Philomena right there and then while they're sitting in their respective patrol cars? Why did Bybee say, talk to her friends? Because he had already groomed Philomena and Marianne Dombro. By the 22nd, when he's talking to Sergeant Legg, or 22nd, 23rd, when he's talking to Sergeant Legg, he had already cultivated and groomed those two women and sucked them in to this mess. Why is Bybee's car at Miss Soul's house repeatedly, sometimes several times a day, when she is in a facility on 11/28/29? You heard all that testimony from Brett Thomas. What's his car doing there? Did the witness have an opportunity to see and know the things about which the witness testified? Did the witness seem to have an accurate memory? Let's talk about some of the witnesses that were presented in the defense case. Sergeant Felix. Sergeant Felix is not on the Bybee train, according to defense counsel. Well, was he treated as a hostile witness? You bet he was. Because he lied on the stand. Because when he was undergoing direct examination by the defense, he testified to one thing. And then the following morning, he came in here and he told you something different when he was confronted by his own lies. He told you late in the afternoon that the investigation was over. And then when he was confronted with evidence that he lied, he admitted that he told his deputies, just put in the report that there was no evidence that anything occurred. Yes, he was treated as a hostile witness. Absolutely. Because law enforcement is a public trust, and he must be held to the standards that everyone else that takes that stand are held to. Same with Deputy Butler. He tried to tell you that there was no evidence, then admitted on the stand that the car was running and that there was blood on Marcia Soul's nightgown. So that's not evidence of a violent crime, and the allegation that Bybee turned her car on so she would die of carbon monoxide poisoning. I don't know what sort of evidence would be required of a first responder. EMT Waltrip? Yeah, he does have a dog in the fight. He absolutely has a dog in the fight. He has to justify on that stand why he did such a sloppy job when he was called out to take care of an 80-year-old woman, and he's shown a flashlight in her face and said there's nothing wrong with her. You bet he has a dog in the fight. Did you hear one simple, straight, coherent, plain answer come out of Waltrip's mouth the whole time he was on the stand? Look at criteria number 3. Was the witness honest and straightforward in answering the attorney's questions? Certainly Waltrip wasn't. Certainly Butler wasn't. Certainly Felix wasn't. Kay Tritchler? She has no memory of anything. She actually had to bring her own little notes into court so that she could remember something that happened in a case so serious. Did the witness seem to have an accurate memory? Kay Tritchler couldn't give you a straight answer to save her life. She couldn't even testify about anything without looking at her own notes. Some of the non-issues in this case. Mr. Stinson said that the truck had fancy wheels or standard wheels. Who cares? Both Mr. Stinson and Miss Souther said that at 11 o'clock on the night of January 11th, when they were attracted by the noise and the lights of the fire trucks and the police cars, that they looked across the street and saw a black truck in Marcia Soul's driveway. That is concrete evidence. It doesn't really matter whether they said the truck had a pink license plate on it or a blue license plate on it, or whether it had standard tires or great big tires. It was a black truck, and we know that Bybee was driving Troy King's black truck on the night of the crime. Another non-issue, whether Marcia Soul calls her relationship with Bybee casual, how does that impact the overwhelming evidence in this case. Does that really matter? And yes, the kidnapping does have legs. In fact, it has 2 legs. Bybee was the prime mover. He's the one that started the ball rolling. He set the wheels in motion in the kidnapping. No one would have gone to her house. No one would have sent her down to Punta Gorda for 2 weeks out of her life if Bybee hadn't sent that email from his IP address at his home and convinced everyone that Marcia was crazy. I used an example during voir dire, and maybe some of you remember it, and probably sounded silly at the time because I couldn't connect it up with the facts of the case. But I talked about a hypothetical situation in which a 16-year-old girl goes into the bank at her father's direction, and she's carrying a note. She doesn't know what's in the note, but Dad tells her to take it up to the teller and give it to the teller and just stand there. And the girl obeys her father and does so. The note says, "This is a stick-up, put all the money out of your drawer in a bag and hand it to me." The teller does so, and the girl walks out with a bag of money. Is that girl guilty of committing a crime? No. Is the father the person that committed the crime? Yes. And that's what Bybee did. Dr. Lerner was just an innocent dupe. He knew that Marcia Soule had threatened to commit suicide, probably more than once. He knew that. And that diabolical email was generated specifically because Bybee knew that it would work. And he did secretly isolate her and prevent her from communicating with anyone. So yeah, the kidnapping charge has legs, 2 of them. Here's an important criteria. Did the witness's testimony agree with the other testimony and other evidence in the case? I've gone over Marcia's testimony and told you what she says about the night of January 11th does agree with the other testimony and especially with the other evidence in the case. Defense counsel says that Mrs. Bybee didn't tell you much. Actually, she told you plenty. What she told you was that her husband wasn't there from 8:30 or 9 o'clock till 3 o'clock in the morning. Something that he denied in his interview with Detective Gaeta, because he said, "I was home all night." We've gone over this, but I want to point out to you that when Detective Gaeta said, "Do you have access to any ATM cards, credit cards?" He said no. Where's the consent? Why didn't he speak up? That was his chance. He got another chance. Mr. Bird said, "There's not going to be anything on her credit cards that you ever charged on her credit cards, right?" No. There's his chance. Last opportunity. Why not take it? Detective Gaeta asked, "From December 29th, when she was Baker acted, has any other deputy or any other person contacted you about Marcia Soule regarding calls for service?" No, not that I recall. Later on, after about an hour and a half, he finally does admit that Mike Day called him, that Collison called him, and that Carson Plank called him, when he starts realizing that this is a lot more serious than he thought it was at first. But when he's asked that question, another lie, over and over again, deceptive, devious, diabolical. Did you write the checks? No. Did you send those checks to the sheriff's office? No. Would your DNA or fingerprints be on any of those checks? No. Shouldn't be. He found perfect victim. She's old, she's frail, she lives alone, she's socially isolated, she's estranged from family and friends. Most of it by her own doing. There's no question that Marcia Soul is a tough customer. She's not a likable person, but that played in so well with Bybee's plan because he knew that she was alone. She's taking multiple medications. She's emotionally dysfunctional. She comes from a middle or upper income bracket. And most important, he learned by asking her about her Wells Fargo accounts that she was financially independent but had no designated financial caretaker. Defense counsel put a witness on the stand, a nurse from Sarasota Memorial Hospital, who testified that there's a Morse scale in which you assess a person's nimbleness or ability to, ambulate. And Miss Soul didn't do very well. Yet, defense counsel would have you believe that Marcia Soul was nimble enough to get into this garage packed with crap and somehow use her walker to get to the car, get in the car, turn the car on, nimble enough to get back out and go sit in her chair. Why was Bybee at Marcia Soul's computer? Another thing that defense counsel didn't mention that corroborates Miss Soul's story, she was able to tell Detective Gaeta that Bybee went over to that window and peered out and saw the police cars. And that's why he would not leave. That's why he remained in that structure after consent was withdrawn. If you believe that Miss Soul actually consented that he come into that house because her door was always left open, when she asked him to leave and he said no, that shows that he remained behind even after consent was withdrawn. And that's what Bybee saw that night on January 11th, and that's why he couldn't leave. He saw that intersection where police cars were all over the place. Bybee's new car rotisserie, purchased on Ms. Soul's PayPal account. Marcia Soul is at Sarasota Memorial Hospital and Consulate Healthcare between November 28th and December 9th of 2016. And Bybee is at her house in his patrol car multiple times on those dates: 11/28, 11/29, 12/02, 12/03, 12/07, 12/08. Marcia Soul is at Heartland Healthcare from December 10th through the 17th. Tanya Thomas told you that they brought her home from Consulate and she took her to Heartland the following day. Bybee's patrol car is at Marcia Soul's house December 12th, December 13th, December 16th, December 17th. And on the 13th is when he used her AOL account and password to order up his car rotisserie.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This evidence was never placed into evidence.
I think there's a reasonable inference which can be drawn from the evidence that was adduced at trial. Overruled.
The morning of January 12th was a debacle. Not one single deputy or sergeant or EMT did their job. But finally, someone addressed the issue, and there was a thorough and complete investigation. And it was determined, and has been proven today beyond a reasonable doubt, that Frankie Bybee committed every one of those 18 charges with which he was charged. Public service is a public trust. And Frankie Bybee twisted and bent and broke the very law that he took an oath, that he swore to uphold for you and all the other citizens of Sarasota County. He violated his professional duties in almost every conceivable way. Ladies and gentlemen, no one is above the law, not even Frankie Bybee. We live by the rule of law, and we rely on sworn law enforcement officers to protect us. We're a civilized society that applies the rule of law, and we're governed by the rule of law, not by the rule of greed and convenience, or the concept that if we want something, we can take it from an 80-year-old woman. He used his knowledge of the law and the power that was vested in him by the state of Florida and by Sarasota County to bend the law to his own purpose. The evidence is overwhelming, and I ask that you find him guilty because the evidence supports an abiding conviction of guilt. Hold him accountable for what he did. Thank you for your patience.